I've got a question for you. What does a role in engineering look like today? According to a recent survey from engineering.com, engineers are spending about 48% of their time doing design work, 32% of their time on non-value add work, and the other 20% is spent on other activities. Within that non-value add work, nearly a quarter of that time is spent searching for information. It is 2023. Finding information should be easy, and it all starts with an effective parts classification strategy. Welcome to the PTC Windchill channel, where we talk all things product lifecycle management, from success stories to strategy and demonstrations. Be sure to hit subscribe down below to get updated on our new videos. In this video, we're going to define what parts classification is, the 5 steps on building an effective parts classification strategy, and we're going to provide you with some additional resources on how to get started. So what exactly is parts classification? For that, I'm going to call on Scott Morris from iRobot to give us the definition.
Parts classification is the ability to identify and categorize different items within your PLM solution. So we could think of them in simple terms like fasteners, connectors, electrical components, and then their various breakdown internally. But really, the advantage here is not only that category that you want to assign to them, but also the attributes that you can assign to them. If I want to find a capacitor and I have certain requirements or criteria that will help me narrow down to find the exact type of capacitor that I'm looking for, based on power requirements, based on footprint, based on installation method, all of those can be captured within the classification system and then presented to folks in terms of a browse or a search, right? Or a combination of the two. I'm looking for a capacitor. What kind? This type. And then let me use the facets to narrow down the very specific things that will bring me to the one item that I need.
There are 5 key steps when it comes to creating an effective parts classification strategy. Starting with step number 1, establishing a parts governance strategy. Starting with a parts governance strategy is critical because it sets up a framework of how to manage new part creation during NPI, or the new product introduction process, that's going to end up changing over time. By setting up a formal parts governance strategy, you'll be laying the foundation for reducing duplicate parts and allowing your company to effectively launch a parts reuse initiative. Speaking of parts reuse, we actually have a free ebook on how companies can save millions with an effective reuse strategy. The link is in the description down below. Next, let's talk about step 2, assigning a classification administrator. You know how librarians learned this thing called the Dewey Decimal System, and they were able to find the exact book you were looking for in an entire library? Well, that's what the classification administrator does. They act as a centralized resource for the entire company. They also play a critical role in ensuring that your strategy evolves with the changing needs of your customers, industry, or the broader business landscape. Now that you have a classification administrator, it's time to move on to step 3, establishing the classification taxonomy with supporting attributes. Let's start with the classification taxonomy, also known as a classification structure, a classification hierarchy, or a classification tree. The most effective information structures are as streamlined as possible, because if the organizational structure is too complex, it may not be truly useful to your end users. A strong classification taxonomy makes it easier to find parts and gets your users back to work designing solutions. Start with a goal in mind, and by clearly defining your organization's reporting and search needs before you even get started. Next comes the part attributes that you'll include in your taxonomy structure. And for that, let's go back to Scott Morris at iRobot.
At iRobot, we use Windchill classification, and we have 2 primary approaches. One is to identify a particular category for an item, and then all of its attributes. If it's a fastener, we want to know what is the thread size and the thread length and the head type and typical things that we would use to categorize a particular item. But beyond fasteners, connectors, electrical components, we also tend to identify various elements of a product. And we're currently working on a new project to come up with what we refer to as the costing structure. Right, so from a costing perspective, we look at a product in a totally different way, right? There's the cost of electronics, there's cost of mechanical, there's cost of assembly, there's cost of purchased goods, and they have a completely different view of what that product looks like. And we are trying to find the right solution with classification to provide this alternate classification view for the costing team.
Scott explained how users can use filtering and Windchill search capabilities to get very detailed information on parts and their attributes, including cost. This is a good segue into step 4, aligning taxonomy with important attributes for purchasing in the supply chain. Going beyond the basics, your part attributes can not only include details about costs, but about materials used, availability of materials, and supplier part classifications, to name a few. For example, if an engineer is searching for an alternate part for a product that has specific sustainability requirements, supplier part classifications can help ensure that those substitutions meet those criteria. And now for step 5, normalizing, validating, and exporting the data. First, review the data and the attributes and normalize them to your standard nomenclature. Otherwise, your data won't show up accurately in reports, or it won't be returned in relevant searches. Next, review the data quality and ensure it's ready for use by validating the units of measure and the field lengths on the attribute fields. This can be seen in those fields that are limited in a PLM system like PTC's Windchill. And lastly, deduplication. Inevitably, there will be duplicate parts within your inventory. But at this point, the parts have been cleaned and their attributes have been populated. It's now much easier to identify those duplicates and develop an actionable strategy on parts reuse. So those are the 5 steps to an excellent parts classification strategy. They may seem challenging, but tools like Windchill make it easy to implement a strategy that fits your company's needs. If you find this useful, drop a like, subscribe, and let us know in the comments what you want to hear about next. See you next time.